The camera light cuts through black water. 2,800 meters down, where no sunlight has ever reached, the ROV thrusters hold it steady against a slow current, while its beam sweeps across twisted steel, gray and rust red, threaded through with rusticles, those iron-consuming bacterial colonies that have been eating this ship from the inside out for 85 years. This is the aft section of HMS Hood. The operator pulls up the reference images from the 2001 survey. Side by side on the screen, the comparison is immediate. A bulkhead that was deformed but standing in 2001 is now gone. The section of hull plating beside it has folded inward by several meters. The magazine spaces, the exact chambers that tore this ship apart on May 24, 1941, are buckling under their own collapsing weight, the steel bending and separating under pressure it can no longer resist. This is not slow, invisible corrosion. This is structural failure, and it has accelerated. After 85 years, the wreck is consuming itself. With it goes the last physical evidence of what really killed 1,415 men. When this structure goes, those answers go with it. To understand what the ROV found at the bottom of the Denmark Strait, you need to understand what Hood was and what she was never allowed to become. She was commissioned in 1920, the largest warship on Earth. At 860 feet long and over 42,000 tons, she was the physical argument for British naval dominance, and the Admiralty used her that way. Through the 1920s and the 1930s, Hood showed the flag on every ocean: the Mediterranean, the Pacific, the Atlantic. She visited ports across the empire. Crowds lined the docks. The press called her the Mighty Hood. She wasn't just a warship, she was a symbol. But underneath that reputation, there was a problem the Admiralty didn't advertise. Hood was an Admiral-class battlecruiser, which meant she was built around a deliberate trade-off: speed and firepower over armor. Her belt armor, the vertical plating along her sides, was heavy. Her deck armor, the horizontal protection over her magazines, was not. At long range, enemy shells don't arrive flat. They fall in steep arcs, plunging downward. Against that kind of fire, deck armor is everything, and Hood's was never enough. The Navy knew this. Jutland had taught them in blood. In 1916, 3 British battlecruisers, Indefatigable, Queen Mary, and Invincible, were gone within minutes of each other, all to the same cause. Enemy shells reached their magazines. Cordite flash did the rest. Each ship went in under 3 minutes. Each took almost her entire crew. Hood absorbed some of those lessons. Flash protection was improved. Handling procedures were tightened. But the full reconstruction the Admiralty actually planned, heavier deck armor and redesigned magazine compartmentation, kept getting postponed. The 1930s came and went. Rearmament priorities, budget constraints, operational demands. The work never happened. This wasn't an oversight. Admiralty's own internal assessments in the 1930s flagged the deck armor problem directly. Design staff drew up reconstruction proposals. Costs were estimated. Schedules were drafted. And then, year after year, Hood was deemed too operationally important to take out of service for the refit she needed. She was the most photographed, most recognized warship Britain had. Pulling her off the world stage felt politically impossible. So they kept deploying her instead, and the reconstruction kept slipping to the following year, and then the year after that. By 1939, she was already overdue for a rebuild that would have fixed her core vulnerability. By 1941, she was the most recognizable warship in the Royal Navy, still carrying the protection scheme of a design born before Jutland's lessons had been fully absorbed, sent into combat against the most capable German battleship afloat. The Admiralty knew what she was. They sent her into the Denmark Strait anyway. May 24th, 1941, 5:52 in the morning. The Denmark Strait, a narrow corridor of freezing water between Iceland and Greenland, fog sitting low on the surface, visibility patchy. Hood and Prince of Wales were moving to intercept Bismarck and her escort, the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. The order was to stop them before they reached the Atlantic convoy lanes. Hood's captain opened fire on the wrong ship. In the poor visibility and the confusion of an early morning intercept, the lead German vessel was misidentified. The first salvos went toward Prinz Eugen instead of Bismarck. Critical minutes burned while the targeting was corrected. By the time Hood's guns were on the right target, the range had closed to roughly 16,500 yards, and Bismarck's 380mm shells were already falling. At that range, those shells were not arriving flat. They were coming down at steep angles, plunging fire, exactly what deck armor exists to stop. Hood's deck armor over her magazines measured inches where it needed to measure more. The geometry of the engagement put her in the worst possible position, closing toward the enemy, her bow on aspect, narrowing the target, but doing nothing to protect the decks above her magazines from shells dropping nearly vertically out of the sky. Survivors on Prince of Wales watched it happen. A jet of flame near the mainmast. Then Hood was simply gone, not sinking. The bow and stern rose briefly, almost gently, before the Atlantic closed over both. The whole sequence, from the first flash to the surface clearing, took under 3 minutes. What happened inside those 3 minutes wasn't fully understood in 1941. It took decades of analysis, and ultimately the wreck itself, to piece it together. The 2019 study by naval architects Jurens, Garska, and Dulin, drawing on both documentary evidence and the physical record of the wreck, concluded the sequence ran like this. A Bismarck 380mm shell penetrated Hood's deck and detonated inside the aft 4-inch secondary magazine. The cordite there ignited. What happened next took milliseconds. Cordite flash isn't fire, in the way a burning building is fire. It is a pressure front moving faster than sound through enclosed spaces, seeking the path of least resistance, rolling through handling rooms and ammunition passages like a wave looking for somewhere to break. It found the adjacent aft 15-inch main battery magazine. Approximately 100 tons of propellant charges detonated in effectively the same instant. The pressure generated inside that hull was beyond anything its frames and plating were designed to contain. It didn't push outward evenly. It vented through deck seams, through hull plating, through every weakness simultaneously. That venting launched her aft turrets clear of their barbettes, separated the stern from the rest of the ship in a fraction of a second, and sent a column of fire 300 meters into the air above the Denmark Strait. 3 men survived. Ordinary signalman Ted Briggs, midshipman William Dundas, and able seaman Robert Tilburn were pulled from the water. 1,415 men were not. Both boards of inquiry convened in 1941 reached essentially the same conclusion. AFT magazine, Bismarck shell, catastrophic internal detonation. The sequence the inquiries described has held up, but the wreck tells a part of the story the inquiries couldn't reach. Forward of A turret, the frontmost main battery position, there is damage that doesn't fit a single aft detonation. Steel is missing. Internal structure shows devastation inconsistent with what a ship experiences simply sinking after a stern explosion. Some specialists argue for partial involvement of the forward 15-inch magazines, a secondary event that the 1941 inquiries had no physical evidence to evaluate. Others aren't convinced. The debate hasn't closed. What that forward damage means is still argued among the people who study this wreck, but its existence matters, because it points to something the official record acknowledged only in outline. Hood's destruction may have been even more complete and even more sudden than the Admiralty's wartime account suggested. The inquiry had testimony. The seabed has the ship, and for 24 years, the ship has been doing the talking. David Mearns found Hood in July 2001, working with the Royal Navy and the families of the crew. The wreck sits at 2,800 meters in the Denmark Strait, broken into 3 main sections spread across a debris field that stretches for miles across the seabed. The bow section, the midships wreckage, and the stern, lying separate rudder still in place, still turned to port, frozen at the exact angle it held the moment the explosion reached the magazines. That rudder detail matters. It tells investigators Hood was in a turn when she died. It places the physical evidence in direct conversation with the eyewitness accounts from Prince of Wales. It's the kind of forensic confirmation that closes arguments. So does the condition of the aft turrets. X and Y turret, the 2 main battery positions at the stern, were blown clear of their barbettes, not toppled, not flooded out of position as the ship sank. Blown free by pressure from below, by the force of an internal explosion venting upward and outward through the deck. The hull sides in the aft section are vented outward, not crushed inward. That's the signature of an explosion originating inside the ship, not a torpedo strike from outside, not a fuel fire working its way down. The wreck confirms the magazine sequence the inquiries described, and it does so in steel. The forward damage, that unresolved question ahead of a turret, remains exactly that, and it is where investigators still disagree most sharply. The missing hull plating forward. The internal structure demolished in ways that do not trace cleanly back to a single aft detonation. 2 serious, evidence-based positions exist, and the wreck supports both enough to keep the argument alive. David Mearns, who led the 2001 expedition, has argued the forward damage points to a secondary internal event, partial or full involvement of Hood's forward 15-inch magazines, either triggered by the blast propagating forward through the ship or by a separate shell strike that history did not record clearly. If the forward magazines went too, even partially, it reframes the entire destruction sequence. It means Hood was not torn apart by a single event. It means she was effectively destroyed twice, in the same second, from both ends simultaneously. The 2019 Jurens-Gardska-Dulin analysis reached a different conclusion. They examined the same physical evidence and found nothing they considered conclusive for a full forward magazine detonation. Their model of the aft sequence, they argued, generates enough energy and structural disruption to account for the forward damage without requiring a second explosion. Both positions are defensible. Neither is proven. What the ROV 4K imaging and photogrammetry surveys have done is give both sides more data to work with, precise measurements of blast angles, hull deformation vectors, the geometry of missing sections, without settling the underlying question. The wreck has given investigators more than the 1941 inquiries ever had access to, and still hasn't given them everything. Now it may never. At 2,800 meters, the environment is doing what it has been doing since May 24, 1941. Cold water, near freezing. Hydrostatic pressure is bearing down on every surface. Biological colonies, rusticles, the iron-consuming bacterial formations first documented extensively on Titanic, are threading through the steel and breaking it down from inside the metal itself. These are not processes that can be stopped or slowed. They are the deep ocean asserting itself over a structure that was never meant to be there. The corrosion rate in cold, deep water is slower than in warm, shallow environments, but it is not zero. Over 85 years, the steel has thinned. The frames that once held Hood's internal decks in place have lost section, lost stiffness, lost the load-bearing capacity that kept compartment walls vertical and bulkheads rigid. Internal spaces that survived the explosion and the sinking have been collapsing progressively for decades, as the structure supporting them weakens year by year. The magazine regions are the most critical part of this picture. They were already catastrophically damaged in 1941, blown open, vented, and torn by the detonation sequence that killed the ship. The surrounding structure took that initial damage and has been carrying it ever since, under pressure, in the cold, for 85 years. What the 2026 remotely operated vehicle survey documented is that the surrounding hull in the aft magazine area is now folding inward. Bulkheads that were intact, or partially intact, in earlier surveys are deforming. The forensic record encoded in the twisted steel, the angles of the blast damage, the direction of the hull venting, the precise geometry of the explosion's signature is being erased section by section as the structure loses its shape. The 2026 ROV survey is doing everything current technology allows. Multibeam sonar builds a centimeter-accurate map of the exterior. Photogrammetry, overlapping high-resolution stills processed into three-dimensional models, captures the geometry of the blast damage in detail the human eye could not hold, standing right in front of it. Ultrasonic thickness sensors pressed against the steel, where the ROV can reach, measure how much section is left in critical frames. The data is extraordinary compared to anything the 1941 inquiries had available. It goes into a digital archive that will exist long after the physical wreck is gone. But a three-dimensional model of a collapsing structure is not the same as the structure itself. Some questions can only be answered by what is physically there: the exact angle of a deformed plate, the relationship between two adjacent failure points, the physical evidence that lives in the geometry of the real steel, and what is physically there is going. The site is protected. The Protection of Military Remains Act 1986 covers it. A 2012 ministerial order added a further layer of specific legal protection for Hood. No salvage, no recovery, no unauthorized access. The British government's position has not shifted. 1,415 men rest on that seabed, and the wreck stays undisturbed. What the ROV can observe from a distance is what investigators have. Nothing more will be taken from that site. The collapse continues regardless. Hood's magazines were always going to fail. The design compromise that made her fast and beautiful and photographed in every port on Earth also made her, at long range, in steep plunging fire, unable to survive. The wreck collapsing now is not something separate from the battle. It is the same event, still running, 85 years later, finally reaching its end. When the last bulkhead folds and the seabed takes what remains, 1,415 men will be beyond reach of any investigation that has not yet been done. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Share it with someone who should hear it.